Hello and welcome to Heartlight Vedic Astrology. In this video, I was going to discuss symbolism of the moon, or Chandra in Sanskrit, as we say, from a Vedic astrology or Jyotish perspective. So if you're somebody who's interested in learning basic astrology, or you're looking at charts or your own chart, then you might find this helpful. Quick note first, though, that the information presented here is for educational purposes only and should not be considered medical, financial, professional, or life advice of any kind. If you are in need, please contact an appropriate professional for support. So the moon, Chandra, it has what we consider several strength positions, meaning that its influence is sort of the best or strongest in certain positions in a chart. So one of these is when it's in its own sign. The moon happens to rule the sign of Cancer, or Karka in Sanskrit. When a planet is in a sign that it rules, we designate it as Swa. I have a limited voice today, so hopefully this will work out and I'll get through the talk. In any case, another strength position for the moon is when it's exalted, or ucha in Sanskrit, and it is exalted in the sign of Taurus or Vrishabha. The moon also is strong when it's a full moon, or when it's a waxing moon, meaning that it's moving from new to full. So it's gaining in light, it's gaining in strength, it's gaining in what we call soma, or sort of this juiciness. It also has directional strength, or what we call digbala. So when the moon is in the fourth house, or fourth bhava, the fourth house or bhava represents north or midnight, and of course in the middle of the night and a dark night is when the moon is brightest and fullest and sort of the most obviously strong and influential in our lives. So weakness positions, when the moon is debilitated or in Nietzsche position, the moon is actually debilitated in Scorpio or Vrishika. The moon is also weak when it's eclipsed, especially during a lunar eclipse. We call that grahan. An eclipse is called a grahan in Sanskrit. When the moon is on the Rahu-Ketu axis, this is also considered a weakness position for the moon. And part of that happens to be related to the moon represents the mind, which I'll get into more. And Rahu and Ketu can signify mental illness. So when you have the moon on the Rahu-Ketu axis, that can be troublesome, potentially. When the moon is new, right when it's eclipsed by the sun, essentially, or when it's a dark moon where it's not too far away from the sun, and the moon doesn't have a lot of light, it's not very bright, these are considered positions of weakness for the moon. Also a waning moon, so when the moon is moving from full to new and it's losing light, that's also considered a weakness position. And when any planet is in Sandhi, which is the first or last degree of any sign, we also consider that a weakness position, because as it's changing signs, it's changing elements, and so the energy is shifting and it's not very stable. And the moon, or Chandra, also has relationships with other planets. So when the moon is in other signs ruled by these planets, it will change the influence of the moon. So when the moon is in sun sign or Leo, or Mercury signs, which are Gemini and Virgo, these happen to be friendly planets for the moon, so the moon tends to work well. When the moon is in signs of Mars, Jupiter, Venus, or Saturn, so Mars would be Aries, Scorpio, Jupiter would be Sagittarius, Pisces, Venus would be Taurus, Libra, Saturn would be Capricorn, Aquarius, then the moon is okay. It doesn't not work well, but it doesn't have any additional strength to it. And the moon is unusual in that it's the only planet that doesn't have an enemy sign. So the moon doesn't seem to be in a house where it's not working well, but there are houses ruled by the sun and Mercury, which do support the moon a bit. So the moon, qualities of the moon. So what does the moon represent? It represents things like the mind, the whole mind, sort of sensory impressions that the mind is taking in, everything that you see and hear and feel and touch. It's taking on all the stuff. So the senses, emotions, also intuition. It's a watery planet, so again, an emotional planet. It's cool, like the light of the moon is cool. It's changeable, like those phases of the moon. So from an Ayurvedic perspective or traditional Indian medicine perspective, the moon has the qualities of Vata or wind and Kapha, earth, because it's cool but changeable. It also happens to be sattvic or spiritual in nature. It is also considered a feminine planet, and it is a natural benefic when it is bright, especially when it's waxing, and it's considered a natural malefic when it's new, dark, or waning. So again, you've got to, if you're looking at the moon, you have to consider all the different, because the moon is the fastest moving planet, and that's why in Vedic astrology, actually, if you get a exact birth time, you can determine the rising sign, or the lagna, or the ascendant. These are all different words for the same thing, and the lagna changes every 2 hours. So if you can kind of lock that in with the specific birth time, then that gives you the most sort of precise reading of a chart. If that's not available, though, then the next thing you would look at is the moon, because it changes signs every 2.5 days or so. So it takes about 28 days to go around the whole zodiac. But because the moon's always changing, you have to constantly check and see what it's doing and what it's interacting with. Anything else here? Let's see. Yeah, so you get a general idea of what we're talking about here with the moon. So if we were going to personify the moon, what would it indicate? So things like the queen, that sort of high level sort of leadership or overseership position, the mother, females in general, caregivers, somebody such as a nurse or hotelier or a food provider, somebody in the hospitality industry, the public, peers, proper type people, so people who are well mannered and well sort of behaviorally conditioned, merchants and trade. This is it's in the Vaishya class or sort of caste, so that can indicate a merchant or a tradesperson. Again, because the moon is constantly changing, it's fickle. It can be showy, like clothes and that sort of thing. It draws attention, that sort of thing. Its persuasion type is through temptation. The way the moon sort of draws us out in the middle of the night. It can indicate a short height for people. Besides clothes being showy, they can also be new, because again, constantly changing. And when the moon is related to the sort of partner or spouse planets or house, then it would indicate a suitable partner. So that's sort of the personification of the moon. Psychology related to the moon. So when it's positively conditioned, well conditioned, positively placed, well placed in a chart, so good house, not a negative house, when it's strong rather than weak. You would find somebody who is receptive, sensitive, imaginative, has a good memory, has sound habits and conditioning. When it's in a weak position or a negative house, not well placed, as we would say, this could be somebody who's hypersensitive or overreactive, doesn't respond appropriately, and has difficulty getting in touch with their feelings. Professions related to the moon, so anything involving water, like fishing or shipping, agriculture, livestock, they actually require a lot of water. Fashion and clothing, because of the sort of showy, creative side of the energy of the moon. Anything related to women, because again, the moon represents sort of the feminine archetype. Travel, because it's constantly changing, transportation, food, hospitality, service in general. The public, imagination, so people like writers might have a strong moon, or people who use their face because the moon represents the face, somebody like a celebrity actor, that sort of thing. So if we're going to look at the moon and what it symbolizes regarding medical conditions in the body, we would look at the face. The moon represents the face, the stomach, digestion in general, because the digestion requires a lot of fluid, and a lot of these things are fluid based. The breast tissue, left-sided complaints, which is in contrast to the sun. The sun represents right-sided complaints. The lungs, fertility, lymph and blood fluid, mucous membranes, fluid balance in general, edema, swelling, nutrition, digestion, these things require a lot of water. Lethargy, so kind of energy levels in moon, the way the moon changes. Drowsiness, again, things affecting the mind. Emotions, gynecological issues, and from an Ayurvedic perspective, rasa dhatu, or nutritive fluid. It can also indicate difficulties with mother, women, psychology, and intuition, as you might start to guess. So places indicated by the moon, watery again, aquariums, beaches, docks, rivers, seas, wells, houseboats, ships, public places, hotels, motels. So now we're getting into the hospitality bit. Nests, breweries, women's residences, hospitals, hostels, terraces, so public places, women's places. A terrace, that might be nice for viewing the moon, so you start to see. So there are other things related to the moon in terms of what it might represent in someone's birth chart. There's certain flowers, foods, types of trees, so like a lily plant, a nice big white flower like that. Rice, obviously, is cultivated in water. Trees with a lot of oil or sap, so again, that liquid component. Night or water blooming plants, again, it's probably seeming obvious now. Melons, coconut, again, these are melons are very juicy, coconut's white. Palm trees, probably because of the oil. Common fruits and vegetables, again, that's getting at sort of the public sort of dimension of things, something that's available to everybody. Cucumber, watery milk, liquid, white. Corn's a little bit of a mystery, frankly, but I've seen it on the list. Poppy, again, herbs that affect the mind. Mild herbs, again, this isn't like a sharp, pungent planet, the way the sun or Mars might be. Water, beer, anything stewed and brewed, so again, liquid. Cooked food, again, hospitality. Water, cold substances, the moon is more of a cold planet than warm. Tender, juicy fruits, and salty flavors like the sea. And then, in terms of time and distance, the moon, Chandra can represent sort of maturation, something that might mature at about 24 years of age. Personified, it represents somebody who's about 70 years old, so somebody who's older, elderly, wise, perhaps. Again, depending on the condition of the moon. The duration of the moon, it's not very long, 0 to 4 years, because again, it's always changing. It's not a very stable planet. The season it represents, so again, these are Indian seasons of Varsha, which is from 20th of July to 19th of September, that time of year in India. That may not translate well to where you live in the world. And also the length, so one yojna, and a yojna is about 48 miles, so again, not very long. This isn't a duration planet, even if it's well conditioned. Unless perhaps, I was going to say unless it's with the planet that represents stability. The 3 planets that come to mind that represent stability are the sun, because the sun is very constant and, sort of driving. Like if you have too much sun, you'll get a desert. But if the moon is with the sun, it's going to be weak because it's going to be new or at least dark, and potentially eclipsed. And then if it's with Saturn, which also represents stability, Saturn can represent things like, especially when Saturn's on the moon in somebody's chart, it usually indicates that somebody is more prone to anxiety and depression, so mood issues. But perhaps if the moon is with Jupiter, because Jupiter is also sort of constant in a different way, just sort of like constant benefic energy, and then that might be a possibility of more wherewithal for the moon, in terms of backing it up and stabilizing some of this natural instability of the moon. Other things related to the moon, so its shape is a circle, its color is pure white. Excuse me. Gemstones are silver and bronze, depending on what list you look at. Its gemstone is pearl. Also, moonstone and crystal can be associated with the moon. And I'll just put a small note here to be very cautious about using gemstones. I've been cautioned by several astrologers that you have to know exactly how they're processed and developed and all this sort of thing, and mantras need to be involved. I don't actually have this information myself, so I can't share it with you. But some people just like to kind of jump on the gemstones and use them, and I've actually, again, been warned. So be very cautious if you do something like this, using gemstones to balance your planets. And that's it. So I think I made it through the talk almost with a few hopefully minor glitches. Thanks for being patient through the talk. In any case, I hope that you find this helpful and useful in your journey with Jyotish and Vedic astrology. Thank you for your time, and until the next one, namaste.